when we are doing every Friday, every Saturday, every weekend in Dublin, and you're doing every 2 weeks in Galway and Cork, over the course of the year, the tickets start really adding up. We soon became Ireland's #1 selling event.
Will Meara, thank you very much for joining me.
It is wonderful to be meeting our newest and brightest Bingo Loco host.
Brightest. I'm definitely the newest. I don't know about the brightest. Tell me, Bingo Loco, you just mentioned it. What is it? And yeah, what's it all about? And where are you at this stage?
Bingo Loco is the world's biggest bingo rave. Now, it's different now, 8 years on, than it was when we started in February 2017 here in Dublin. And we had started it as sort of a response to what we saw was a growing trend in a few things. One was interactive entertainment, things like secret cinema. We'd seen other bingo parties around the world, drag bingo, bingo at the Standard in New York. We'd seen Rebel Bingo in London, created by a guy who had worked in TV for years. And at the same time, we also saw that there was competitive socializing as a rising trend. This thing like, electronic shuffle, darts, indoor arcades, the kind of thing where you go out with your friends for a couple of beers, you're playing together, but you're competing against each other, and it's that like feeling of competitive socialization. And we felt like this was missing. And we also had years of being promoters, and myself and one of the other business partners have been traveling, and there's a whole harebrained story of how we've been inspired by bingo in a different way. But we'd come home after a long stint and realized we need to start something. We need to refill the travel coffers. It was never meant to be a big global entertainment enterprise. We thought we would do one, maybe even two, we'll see what happens. And we sort of stitched together the bones of something. The prizes for Bingo Loco were things we'd found around our house, an old TV that didn't work, a car clamp that had been cut off a car, funny things. It wasn't about the prizes. It wasn't about a clean-cut show. We had people on stage in leather and chains. We had, fur jackets, and it lasted 5 hours, and we had stacks of cans, and we were all hammered and fell off the stage sweating after 5 hours of an improv script. But people came to the side of the stage and said, what the hell was that? And when's the next one? And we're like, well, I guess there will be a next one. And that started a sort of a year-long series of monthly shows selling out. And I think after 3 shows, we were already doing, Body and Soul, Forbidden Fruit, and all these festivals that other artists are years trying to get slots at, because we were more than an artist. It was a show. It was an experience. And it was something that was unique, that didn't exist. And it had the perfect combination of something to do, right? Now, before this, we were talking about distractedness and everything else. And at a show, even if you're at a rock concert of your favorite band, for 90 minutes, you'll probably be looking away, checking your phone, going to the bar, going to the toilet. You're quite distracted. And we are very distracted people now as technology has become more, I guess, engaging and distracting. Bingo gives you a focal point. It gives you something to do, to busy your hands. Even when you're socializing within a group of 5 or 6 people, if you're maybe not necessarily a massive extrovert, you've got something to keep yourself busy with. You can sit back, you can watch the show, you can join in as much as you want. And between having the audience as part of the show, which makes it interactive, and also you're playing as well as that, the near miss moments of, whether it's a number beside your number, whether it's one away from your number, bingo itself is exciting enough. And we realized that there was a passion for bingo, a passion for making a show of yourself, passion for a party, something that kept you engrossed for the entire duration. And with the prizes being pretty average, but the top prize of a holiday, keeping you there for the end of the show. And we noticed this is actually generating quite a lot of bar spend, this gamified experience. And so it wasn't long before the venues were like, what's this bloody bingo thing? Can we do a show here? So then we went all around Ireland, and we were in every single major city in Ireland with the exception of Roscommon, because there was only one hotel and everyone gets married somewhere. And we decided to go and try and find some of the let's call it Irish diaspora around the world. The Irish that were doing J1s in New York and Chicago, those who were doing the working holiday visa in Australia. And in 2018, we started popping up in some of these cities. More as a tour to hit the Irish people who might have seen it back home but hadn't had a chance to go. And also an opportunity for us to massage our egos and say, we just did a gig in New York, we just did a gig in Sydney. This sounds impressive to me and everybody else. And so once we got a taste for international markets, understanding how it worked, setting up local entities, meeting local partners and venues, 2019 was the year we sort of really saw ourselves slingshotting. You know, we were doing revenues we never thought we would do. We were putting structures and organization in place that, you know, didn't exist because our model of events didn't exist in Ireland. And we soon became Ireland's #1 selling event. And it's not necessarily because we have a model of, you know, doing a big show. Like if an artist comes and does, you know, 2 nights in Croke Park, they're going to sell a lot of tickets. But when we are doing every Friday, every Saturday, every weekend in Dublin, and you're doing every 2 weeks in Galway and Cork, over the course of the year, the tickets start really adding up. And you're never more than, you know, a 30-minute drive to being able to go to a Bingo Loco with any one given month anywhere on the island of Ireland. And that level of, you know, Vodafone network coverage, if you use the term, allows you to really capture it everywhere. So no matter where you are in Ireland now, everyone has heard of or has at least seen what Bingo Loco is. And that frequency model was something that hadn't been done before. Bands would tour maybe once, twice a year, whereas we were touring weekly. And it soon became obvious to us that we're not a touring band. We are kind of like, if you were to have a bricks and mortar business, somewhere that you would go to do something, like imagine going to the Leisureplex once every few months. We became something that had repeatability. And we learned this through simply just asking the audience at their shows, who is a Bingo Loco virgin? And we'd see where the hoops, hollers and cheers are coming from. We'd say, who's a veteran? And based on the audience engagement, we'd go, okay, right, this is a very softish way to do it, but it's a lot of people coming back and again and again. We started getting a lot of corporate inquiries. We had the likes of Meta, LinkedIn, Twitter, all going, can we book this for our Christmas party, for a summer party? But we wanted a PG version, please. I'm like, all right, you know, you ask for it, you'll get it. And so this sort of like made us really realize that what we had created here was more than just a themed event. This was sort of a phenomenon, the same way you would see like, you know, these indoor pitch and putt bars all around London or in New York, where you might go on it for a date night, you might go with some friends for a birthday, for a stag, you know, warm-up activity. And we'd sort of created that activity where it's like, you're not just going to a show, you're going to an activity. Bingo Loco is an activity. And that really allowed us to realize that we had more than just Ireland as a stage, and that this model could work globally once we'd localized it. And so it wasn't very long between after COVID, when we had to do a bit of a pivot into doing basically TV shows in our warehouse for corporates, that we took on the UK. After the UK, we took on North America, and it's brought us to 210 locations today where we do Bingo Loco on a reoccurring basis. The beauty of that is, if you look at most agencies, that is to say, if you look at most talent managers who they might have a roster of 10 artists and they book for 20 venues. Because we are our own IP, that is to say, Bingo Loco is, we are the artist, we produce the show. The performers are our performers that work directly for us. We do the marketing and promotion for our own show. So we're the artist, the promoter, the agent, and the manager all in one. This gives a lot of versatility because it means then that you're not giving exclusivity to any one promoter, maybe a Live Nation or an AEG. You are your own promoter. And so you don't need to go exclusively with any one group. You do all the commercialization in-house, but we've also built up this global footprint of venues that we program. And it wasn't long before we realized that we have access to more venues than probably any other promoter, where we are directly the artist. And the venues like that because they're dealing with you directly. The deal's done with you. There's no middlemen. You know, they know they're dealing with the artist, the producer, the manager, the agent, and the promoter all in one. So there's a lot of direct control and a lot of beautiful relationships with the venues, a lot of flexibility. Some venues were with 8 years. The first venue in Dublin we ever started in, we're still there 8 years later. We're very loyal. And, you know, when they pivot, we pivot and we work together on things. Make sure that if we're trying to increase our revenue, that, you know, they're increasing their revenue too. And that's really worked for us because when we now launch a new idea or a new concept, in other words, a new IP that we build the brand and we develop the show, we can now turn on the lights globally for that concept once we've trialed it and tested it. And so that's what we're doing now with other concepts outside of Bingo Loco. One called Day Shift, which is a mature party of people in their 30s and over. It happens during the day. And also Tipsy Rodeo, which is a Nashville experience with like country-oke, which is just karaoke with country music. Everyone's doing line dancing. There's live bands. You come down, your cowboy boots, your cowboy hat, and it's exactly what you would experience on a night out in Nashville, but in Belfast, in Dublin, in New York, in Denver, even in Perth in Australia. So it's become very obvious to us that if we spend a small bit of time creating something in the first few months, testing it out in a live audience and it works, we can now put that concept and put it into all the venues globally. And there's a lot of value in that because other promoters can't do that. So there's value not just in Bingo Loco as an IP and the ticket sales from that. There's the network effect of layering anything we ever do here forward on top of it. So we're not just Bingo Loco anymore. We're this new entity, which is Locomotion. And that is basically a bulldozer train of creative ideas that will constantly keep spitballing. And venues, after seeing we do a Bingo Loco and it works, we put in a Day Shift and it works, we put in Tipsy Rodeo and it works, they're like, what else you got? Fill our calendar.
As you're talking, it seems like a lot of the scale of what Bingo Loco has become was kind of accidental, and you were learning as you were going. But you said something very interesting there a second ago. You talked about, you know, we started Bingo Loco because of trends that we saw, and I'm just interested in how intentional were you around the kind of business of it at the start, and you know, was it always something that you wanted to do, was to kind of start a business and to see it grow?
I think a lot of people, when they're starting a business with real intention, they look at scale, they do a proper business plan, they look at like what a forecast might look like. So their business plan might be, well, here's what our target audience is. And our target audience spends this much on this product or service. And we have identified this is the size of that. And therefore, this is the potential market. And that's fair enough. That's starting off with looking at the market. But really, a lot of what, you know, you can do all that, go out there, develop a prototype, put it to market, no one buys it. With events, it's very much so. Throw it at the wall, throw a few things at the wall, see what sticks. And there was a bit of that. I would say if you went to a show a year ago, it's different from what you'd see at a show now. And so it's ever evolving based on customer feedback, based on, you know, market trends. If, for example, you know, an Irish star is featured in a blockbuster movie, you can be sure that a show very soon is going to have a cardboard cutout of that star. So you can't do the same thing that you were doing 6 months ago because your audience is coming back on a reoccurring basis and you want to make sure it's fresh, it's new. Maybe you'll do a Taylor Swift theme. Maybe you'll do a country theme. Country is one of the biggest rising trends in music at the moment. So when we were starting it, there was definitely the vision for like, this could work. This could be really big. But we were only thinking like, this could be something we do on Monday in Dublin on a regular basis. We weren't thinking, let's do this across the globe. And we only went to the US January last year. Could we have done that 5 years beforehand? Absolutely. But we just didn't have the understanding or the vision. But the experiences of pivoting through COVID, the experience of expanding in a territory on the other side of the world like Australia, and the logistical nightmare that is, trying to replicate what we did in Ireland and the UK, coming up against, you know, compliancy, different taxation regulations. Somewhere like the US, where you've got city tax, state tax, federal tax, and they're all different. And how you do your show depends on like the laws and regulations of that state. It just seemed like too much. But because we had spent the guts of like 6.5 years building the business in some countries, by the time we did go to the US, we were able to get within a year to 100 cities. And even in the US, the biggest promoters are like, how the hell did you do that? And it's because, well, we broke our teeth in other territories. We learned about how to make a hub, how to build a fly-in, fly-out model, how to, when a problem arises, how to solve it. And so when we finally did hit the ground, we could grab the map fast. And with something like a self-created IP, first mover advantage is everything. People see a good idea in Dublin, they might want to create it in Cork. But if you're in the space of 3 months, Dublin, Cork, Galway, Limerick, Belfast, that's a huge deterrent to someone else going, well, we're going to be second to it. It's going to be hard to compete with an existing customer base, an existing brand. And in those early stages, people don't realize it's maybe a bigger market for that product than they might realize. Maybe there is room for two. But as long as you get there first and you're doing the right job marketing and you're in the best venue in town, they're always going to be playing catch up. So the experiences we've had around the world have meant that when we finally went to the biggest market in the world, that we could do it extremely aggressively. And there is no sign of slowing down.
For you personally, did you always think that you'd be running a business or being a, for want of a better expression, an entrepreneur?
I think so. Dad was a car salesman. So naturally saw him constantly doing a soft sale on almost everything he touched. It was just in his personality. Maybe I got it from that. Studied mechanical engineering, was very good with numbers, problem solving, reasoning, could work my way around a spreadsheet or a thermal model, but ultimately had no joy in it and found myself in university running an engineering society that ran more events than the student union. And that naturally led me to become ENTS officer, and I did it for 2 years and turned the union's events around and membership programs and revamped a lot of the stuff that we were doing with our shops and commercial stuff on site. You're sitting on a director of board of directors, having just finished your mechanical engineering degree, and you're like, this is kind of cool. I'm enjoying like how we are making key decisions. I'm enjoying how we're controlling this company. I'm learning stuff that people will never have the opportunity to learn unless they went for a business degree. Maybe I should use this. And having left that, I sort of ended up stumbling into being commercial manager of a digital marketing agency, hating that, leaving it, became the commercial manager of the Union of Students in Ireland, helping all the other student unions with their commercial endeavors, seeing no joy in that either, and realizing that it's not that I'm not enjoying what I'm doing. It's very fun. I was creating innovation summits and all sorts of stuff, but I want something that's mine. And so decided to quit everything. And I had some things going, like morning raves, you got it before work, and I had like my own kind of design and social media kind of entity and stuff like that. But I decided to put a hard break on, and I went traveling for like 16 months back to back. And I went to all sorts of places around the Middle East and Asia, and was sort of like picking up ideas of, what could be something that would give me a passion. And I also had a small business at that time, like called Unplugged, the digital detox kind of company. And again, was enjoying it, but wasn't really fully immersed in it because I was off traveling. And coming home and sitting with, my best friend and another friend at the time, I realized that actually the joy in this is not necessarily just having your own business, not necessarily leaning into your strengths of commerciality, but actually it's working with people who you genuinely love. And some of the adventures and the madness of the early days, where we were very much so part of the product, we were on stage, we were running around, we were partying just as much as everyone else was. The festivals were an opportunity for us to have a good time. We were very much so working within the business rather than on it, because we hadn't really thought about how do you strategize and blow this up. We were just working hard on it, creating something really beautiful, and just seeing where the next opportunity came from. We would do some reach out, we would do some deals, but ultimately every show was, how do we make this show special? What can we do to this bit here? How can we let off more confetti? And that was an important part of the process. But as we've gotten older, as I'm now, in my mid-30s, and I find myself probably partying less than before, now we have the joy of having a very well-refined product, understanding how to build one of those products, and having the mature lens of, create, build it, and grow it. And that's been the process of maybe the last 2 years, where you realize that you have this skill set of being an entrepreneur, which you kind of referred to, like, have you ever thought that you'd be doing this? Well, once you realize that you're in this, and there's never a world where you'll be working for a company ever again, that you can create an idea, build something, and do that all day and every day, there's no going back. There's no going back to sitting within an org chart and whatever it is. I don't think it's an ego play as an entrepreneur. It's not even necessarily a freedom play either. It's the idea of putting your creativity with your mind and with your hands, and leading a team with that vision to be able to build something. And there's no greater feeling than, when someone goes, oh, I've seen that bingo thing. That's really interesting. I'd love to go to that. And, you inspire something in them. And a lot of my friends who, have, I don't know, been in various companies for years, have slowly started to emerge into the entrepreneurial world and would say, thanks so much for your support and your advice. I'm finally going to go and create something new myself. And that's brilliant. So if anything, I think maybe it's also a disease, being overambitious. Maybe it takes us away from the special moments of family and friends and life. But that takes a bit of experience. If you look at younger entrepreneurs, it's business first, everything else second. And now if I look at me and my business partners, the business, even though it's bigger than ever before, doing money that we never thought we'd ever have access to, at the same time, I see them prioritizing family, their children, their lifestyle, taking time off, time to themselves. So there's been a real growth within ourselves in a different way as the company's grown, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I was going to wait to talk about this maybe towards the end of our interview, but seeing as you've mentioned it, you had a great post on LinkedIn about your Aunt Violet and some of the things you learned. Could you talk a little bit about some of those things and why they resonated so much?
The ethos of what my Aunt Violet was to me, who was kind of like a mother growing up and a very safe haven when times the family was in a more chaotic stage, was she always kind of filled the role of the gentle advisor. And we all have these gentle advisors in our life. And it might be a parent, it might be an uncle, it might be an aunt. There's someone who doesn't have the dictatorial parental role, and they tend to be more gentle with their advisory capacity. As such, they tend to be an open book. You can ask them more questions, they're more receptive to silly questions, especially growing up. But when she was dying of cancer 3 years ago, I spent a lot of time kind of sitting with her. We'd get a chair, we'd go out to the front garden, get some sun on her because she was sitting inside a lot. And although we had endless mini little podcasts almost, where I would ask her a question, I'd hold space for her to get more information. I might even ask a follow-up question showing I'm really interested in a certain direction. I'd ask her, did she have any regrets? And in fairness to her, she didn't have a huge amount of regrets. She lived a life that was true to her. She never left anybody unpaid. She found solace, even though she lived alone, in the birds outside the window and the beauty in the space that she lived, in a farm in West Cork. But in short, she said that nothing in this life, if I was to condense all these kind of nitbits into one, nothing in this life is worth more than the time with those who you love the most. And I do see a lot of like my male friends who they're very goal orientated. They're very ambitious individuals, very driven characters. They're out there to make as much money as possible. Their whole sense of self is directly linked to what their forecasted revenue is, how well they look to be doing. Conversations are very around the contracts I've got coming in, how much money I'm making at the moment. And I'm proud of them. I think it's a great thing to be ambitious. But at what cost to, you know, why are you working 6 days a week and your partner's doing all the parenting? Maybe you could take some days off or relook at your schedule or hire in, because the value of the time with your children might be worth 5x that extra Saturday that you're doing weekly to bring in some extra revenue. And although you might have like a nicer car and maybe like a more renovated house, is the value with your partner more important? Is the value with your children and that time spent together going to resonate more and compound itself down the line? And another conversation I had with my own father recently, he's currently 80, suffers from Parkinson's, and I'm in Ireland when the management team are living in the US now because I need to be near him at this time. And he said something that resonated with me. He said, I wish I hadn't worked so hard. It seems obvious, and we all know it. He's like, you spend your whole life and you build up a portfolio of properties and you work really hard to save money and you're very careful, you're really attached to the idea of how to save and not spend and, not compromise in certain things, but make, enough and provide. And then you get to an age where you have loads of it and you can't really do anything with it. And I asked a very direct and honest question. I said, do you wish you'd spent more time with us? Oh, it's a big question to ask your father. And he said, yeah, I think so. So I think the learning is, and I think there's wisdom in, we might look at our parents sometimes and say, what do you know? The modern world's different. But humans are still fundamentally the same. And our flaws are fundamentally still the same. There's been wars hundreds of years ago and there's still wars today. I think if we don't prioritize like leaning into investing in time in your community, you might one day find yourself sick in a bed surrounded by one or two people who hung in there, rather than people who are falling over each other to come and be with you in your time of need. We can go to bed at night with a million worries in our head. But if you're sick, you're going to bed with one worry. So investing in yourself, investing in your community, building a business, it's an endless process. Let it wait until tomorrow. The things that are important to you now, the real collateral value of your life is your family, the people you love around you, and also your own health. If you're staying at a screen for 14 hours a day and you're constantly getting cortisol spikes because of emails coming in and you're angry at what someone said or someone's not doing something on time, you're going to put yourself into an early grave and the millions in the bank will be worth nothing.
Why do you think it is that this message has resonated with you? Because I think that we've all heard it. Maybe we haven't heard it from our family members or someone so close to us that it might resonate a little bit more. But why do you think that message has settled with you personally?
Deciding when to have children is an interesting thing. Women sort of have a biological clock. Men maybe have a more of a spiritual, paternal instinct to go and do it. My dad kicked it around for a very long time, and so he had, children in his late 40s. What that means is me and my sisters collectively, we watched a lot of his siblings on that side of the family and my mom's side die very early. And so when you get really close to people who are at that stage of their life at a young age, you start to see what motivates and drives them. And so when I was a kid, the things that motivated my father are very different from what motivates him today. Today he's motivated by getting into the back garden, listen to nature, feel the sun, because he realizes that's the beautiful thing in life. Rushing around to a meeting, that's a construct, we can't be late, we must do this, we don't have to do anything. People throw you a ball, throw you a problem, you feel obliged to catch it. And I think you see people at a later stage in life who are maybe closer to death, they don't feel that same obligation. They're like, nah, it's a waste of time. There's more of like the subtle art of not giving a fuck. That kind of, you perfect that, and when you get to an age, you realize that a lot of these things we think that matter, when time's ticking out, if you got one day left to live or a week left to live, all the things that you think matter today really don't matter. So seeing a lot of my family die, and really only having my father left, and who's close to that stage in his life, sadly, it really makes you realize, well, what would he do? You know, um, like what? How can you seize the most in your life? And I've spent a lot of time in the last while. I know this isn't very related to Bingo Loco, but I spent a lot of the last while driving up and down to Cork to this farm where my aunt lived all her life because I'm building a bit of a project there. And these 4 hour drives, I'm doing really long calls with friends, talking about life, self development. We're checking in on each other, and doing that in the last 6 months has had an amazing effect where we're inspiring each other, giving each other feedback, positive affirmations. It's given me a more rounded approach to my business. Um, there's a lot of winds of change constantly in our life, and we constantly feel like something's changing. It might be like, the business is changing, might be the relationship is changing, might be your friend group. Um, could be political change outside of your control. Change is inevitable. And I think having a strong community around you is super important. And that also lends into the workplace as well, where you don't necessarily have a deep and meaningful friendship with the people who work for you, but you can definitely hold space and understand what they're going through and listen more to your employees rather than telling them what to do. Because when you listen to them, you're going to find out a lot more about what you're doing wrong. They won't tell you explicitly, but you'll find out that rather than just a top-down approach, if you listen from the ground up, you'll find out the best way to service them. They'll feel heard. They'll feel like they enjoy their work more, and you'll communicate better with them. I think we all fall into the here's a task, get it done category. And why is it not done? But ultimately you work with people, and we're very complicated.
But tell me about your co-founders, because well, you even said a minute ago, it's about kind of spending time with people you love. And my understanding from the little bit of research I did before this is that you and your co-founders, I suppose now business partners, were friends prior to this. Talk to me a little bit about your relationship with them.
Sure. So Stephen Lawless is one of the other partners from North Dublin. And we'd met a good couple of years ago. I want to say back in 2015, me, him, and my other business partner, Craig, who was my best friend. We were trying to put on a rave in a warehouse, and trying to figure out buses and how to print tickets. And it was very early days. We knew it was an illegal rave, but we were going to just try it anyway. We found a guy at a warehouse who was up for it, and we wanted to try and sell some tickets. And we ended up having to pull it in the end because, of course, a word got out that there was an illegal rave happening. And but Craig and Stephen had also been working in the right venue. They had sort of like a social media agency, and they were mainly doing it for the right venue. They'd given them a bit of office space in there, so they were contractors but in-house, and they had one or two other retainers as well. And when I'd been off traveling, the two of them had come out to visit me in Bali. We'd had a great time together, a lot of bonding. And so when we came home and we were all shooting ideas around, okay, Will and Craig are home because Craig was with me traveling. When the idea came up, it was a matter that they already had this sort of coming together. It was called Fourth Wall at the time. I had sort of parked a few other businesses and projects to focus on something new, a fresh place, something that really invigorated me. And we naturally kind of came into it. But at that time, Stephen was also working as a nurse in a psych ward, right? And the only person who really had academic training pertinent to what they were doing was Craig, who studied marketing in DIT. That's how we met. We met in university. And he was now going to take care of the ads, the marketing, the branding and design. And because I'd always been in sort of commercial roles, it made sense that I would, do the market expansion, do the growth. And Craig had always been someone who was very adaptive to trends, was very good at kind of identifying, what's working, what's what everyone else is doing. He's constantly fascinated with reading up about what other promoters are doing, what's happening at the venue, competitor analysis. Whereas Stephen would be very much so organizational, operational. Okay, there's a gig happening. I'm going to buy the stuff. I'm going to draw, very hands-on. And I've always been I'm going to make a pitch deck. I'm going to call this guy. I know someone will get a referral, knock on someone's door, like, let's do a deal, And that's a really interesting mix because you got someone who opens the market, someone who sells in the market, and then someone who delivers the product. And at the early stages, we were doing all the other like kind of soft touch stuff like invoicing and accounts and responding to customer service and responding to emails. And they were easy positions to fill. But having a strong operational core, having a strong marketing person, and having someone who would sell to the shadow on the wall allows you to kind of grow the business pretty quickly. And when you talk about personality types, I'm very bullish in one direction, Stephen's very bullish in another direction, and Craig's very much so you're middle of the way. So he's a good balancing energy between my think big, Stephen's practicality, and then Craig has a bit of both. But between us all, we are a very balanced three-way. And if you're an entrepreneur on your own, it can be a lonely experience. It's essentially a bit of a dictatorship because it's your way or the highway. And if you are a great visionary and it works, brilliant. And you'll need a lot of mentorship, but you're making decisions in isolation. And that can be tough because you don't know whether it's the right decision or the wrong decision. And sometimes people aren't so quick to give you the best advice. It might be biased. 2 is hard. If you and me run a business and we're trying to make a decision, if you agree and I don't agree, well, now we're locked. And we need to have maybe a board meeting with an external director to make a 3-way vote. But when you got 3 people, it's very easy to get a majority, and if there's one person swayed in the middle, typically they know they have the killing blow and you can go in one direction, but it means that we don't get stuck. We can keep moving even when there's hard decisions to make. And we've had some extraordinarily hard moments over the years. And I don't know if we would have done so well if we were a group of 2 or if it was solo.
Did you fall into those roles because the way you're talking about it now, and hindsight's 2020, you have a particular skill set and you all kind of have something that you're interested in the business, operations, marketing, sales. But did you define those at the start or did it just kind of happen naturally?
A bit of it happened naturally because I think Stephen was doing sort of like the invoicing and doing some bookkeeping for the business he had with Craig beforehand. And Craig was always the marketeer. So it was clear as day that he was going to continue to do the ads and kind of manage the socials for it. I sort of always maybe kind of leaned into anything that was more legal and that was more analytical and detailed. So if a contract came across, it might just get signed without review, but it became very evident that I was very much so like, please give me the contract. I'm going to read it because I don't want to have us have a problem down the line. And then we went down an interesting route where in 2021, we onboarded the previous managing director of our biggest competitor in the UK. And because we were planning to go to the UK, and this was a great way to, get the competitor insight, hit the market fast. And also because they had a bigger market to grow in, we needed to understand how to set up the logistical side of doing a much bigger market than Ireland. That also gave us a bit of strategy because now we put ourselves more into lanes than ever before. We'd hired someone, we'd made them CEO, we'd put ourselves under the CEO, but we also own the company. So it's a bit of a time glass structure. The 3 of us sit as directors and shareholders of the company that the CEO reports to. But at the same time, technically we are managed by the CEO. That creates a very interesting dynamic where we sort of like are accountable to the CEO who's accountable to us. And CEOs can struggle with that sometimes because they want to have the freedom to be able to go run the company. But the ultimate control lies with the shareholders. It's a bit of tug of war there. But ultimately we decided after maybe 18 months where we'd been put very much into lanes, we didn't step outside of our lanes. We realized that as a company, when you are growing, one hand needs to know what the other one's doing. And if you are completely in your lane, we realized that sometimes I might give something of operational insight to the operations team because I'm closer to what's happening with the new venues coming on board. And in the same way, what Craig's doing will be very important to me. If I'm opening up a market in another city, he can say, that's a terrible market based on these trends, based on this and that analytics. We've done some tests and this doesn't make sense. And so we we ended up reverting back to me and the two boys co-chairing the executive operation of the company again. And when I say the company went from like, which was pretty much going into the wall at the time, it was like a Nike tick up to the right. So we turned the company around. The staff were much happier. Morale was a lot higher. And it wasn't long before we decided to then go take on the US, because this was a strategic decision by the previous CEO that it was a very big market. It would be very hard to take on. There would be very little control. There's lower hanging fruit in the UK instead. And I guess we realized, and we kind of knew it ourselves, that was wrong. And now the US company, within the space of a year, dwarfs the rest of the global operations by a multiple.
So you don't have, am I right in saying you don't have one CEO? It's kind of three people at the top and decisions are made by
unanimous agreement. Yeah. So we're deciding to do something like, and typically we have a certain level of respect of like, okay, you know what you're doing, go off and do it. If someone's pushing back on it and the other person's not saying something on it, they might be like, okay, that person doesn't have an opinion. I strongly want to do it. You're not really for it. And it's like, all right, well, you know what? Go do it. Let's experiment. So there's a lot of freedom to experiment. There might be, say, a theater that has a lot of fixed seating. It's not a standard Bingo Loco venue. But I know in this town, there's no other venue. So if we want to do it here, we should be going here. I might slip it in. I might contract it, get it done, get it up. And then maybe Craig go, oh, for fuck's sake. This is going to be completely off brand. I'm like, well, let's just experiment. Let's just try it, And then we do it. It sells out, makes money, and everyone's happy. And then we don't mention it. We don't say I told you so. We just go, let's move on. Let's put some more shows in. And vice versa. There might be something that like, I don't think that's a good idea. Or I think we should be doing twice the frequency in this market. And he might say, I don't think that's worthwhile. And I'm like, let's do it. And then we'll just leave it. And I'll find that we haven't increased the frequency and we've experimented with something else. So it's important to give each other, park the ego, leave it at the door. If someone who's working in an area based on that, and respecting each other's experts in what we're doing within the company, if they truly believe something, let them go off and do it. And if they're wrong, then we learn from it. We don't do it again. But it's making sure that we don't inhibit each other's intuition. And that also goes for like respecting, like if, for example, someone in a past life had a bad experience working with a venue before Bingo Loco or whatever it is, and I'm trying to onboard, and that person's like, look, I don't know if it's a good, but like, I don't feel comfortable with it. No worries. I'm not going to do anything that's going to make you feel uncomfortable. And we park it. So there's a lot of mutual respect for each other. You have to treat each other like a life partner. You have to listen, you have to care, you have to understand, hear their points. Sometimes you might be talking over each other. It's like, okay, let's stop and come back to it tomorrow.
You come across to me as someone who is very laid back. I suppose that's how you appear. But when talking to you, you're kind of wise beyond your years, and it's quite obvious how much you think about this business and how into the detail you are of it. I suppose my question is, you're quite an individualistic person, it seems, and I'm wondering, has that been important to you on this journey with your co-founders or otherwise?
We're very different. We slag each other. We also like praise each other. Like if I'm talking to someone, I'll talk high of my business partners. I would hope and assume that they do the same. And I can be laid back sometimes, but like in a commercial role, your main goal is growth. If I'm not growing the business, it just does this. It might even start doing this after a while. Because you have to make sure that you're optimizing the venue deals, making sure that we're figuring out ways to like, make some extra savings without compromising the product. And it's impossible to be in a commercial role without having a certain sense of bullishness. And so you need to wear several hats. If you're a commercial person, you need to be driving the best possible bargain for the business, but doing it in a way that like the other person needs to also be winning too. A venue is not going to want to keep working with you if they're not making money, right? So you get to be very fair but you have to be also very persuasive and let them understand, what your costs are, what you need to be making, and understand what they need too. When it comes to like the three of us and even the management team, sometimes you'll find yourself at a board meeting and you're battling your corner for something, and you realize that, is this worth it? Is this fight worth it, or is this going to cause a knock-on effect or something down the line? Am I going to want to get something down the line and I'm fighting this person on what they want? And ultimately, it's a bit of give and a bit of take. If you find that one person's constantly taking from the team, you can feel overall there's less receptiveness when they then come with something. And so even when there might be like a very intense moment, and I think any group of shareholders, directors in our format, because we've no VCs, we've no investment, we bootstrap it, own it 100%. Anyone who's in that position knows that the biggest problem with running a company after a year or two is you're in it for the long haul. You've made your bed with these people and you have to get on with each other. So it's not a matter of like being an avoidant business partner. You have to lean in and understand and get to know them. And although there's a default instant easiness between me and Craig, me and Stephen were always more of business partners, but now it's not like that anymore. We spent 8 years working together. We've been through all sorts of stuff. And so although we might individually frustrate each other, we also know that our core interest is making sure that the business works and that we're all comfortable in doing what we're doing. So if someone's like, I'm too busy at the moment, we're like, okay, then you need to hire someone. Let's get you some assistance in getting someone to support you. Because the last thing we want is, if you're bad, then balls are going to drop. And no one wants to drop balls.
What's the most important thing within the Bingo Loco brand for you, or within the business?
I think it's the product. If the product gets shortchanged, if anything, the cost to run a show has only gotten more expensive. And that's not because of inflation. It's to constantly keep building the moat. Whether that's enhancing the prizes, whether it's like doing additional training with the staff, adding in some uniforms, ordering in some new props and stage decor, building out better show visuals. Ultimately, customers will only come back if they feel there's value for their ticket. Markets like the US, you've got much more ticket elasticity. Some markets you can get away with a much higher ticket price. Here, if you change the price by €2, you'll see the fill rate in your event accordingly. It's like you dial up the price and then you got less percentage fill in your venue. Whereas in the US, they have much more elasticity. The financials are there. They are credit generation. Everything goes on the card. Taxes, fees, and gratuity are always just added on. So people have this sort of behavioral, psychological understanding that whatever the price is, it's probably going to be more at the end anyway. And I'd say ticketing companies probably take advantage of that a little bit, but that's a different topic. So for us, the most important thing for us is making sure that the product's good. So every single show, and we'll do 1,500 shows this year, it's 700,000 tickets. Every single customer gets asked for feedback. And it's not ignored. There's a person whose whole responsibility is gathering it, compiling it, feeding it back, making sure it's addressed, chasing up on it. And you'll always get massive problems where like a venue closes down and you've got like 3,000 or 4,000 tickets for a couple of shows there, and you're trying to move it to another venue and you're trying to find a home and you've got 3 days to do it. And customers are like, we've seen the venues closed down. What are we going to do? So that creates a bad experience before they've even walked in the door, and it's not in our control. We wouldn't had no part in that. And so even then you have to make sure that your customer service is on point, and that can be hard because customer service, what are we doing? I'm like, I need 24 hours, So customer first, solid product. If you don't have that, you have nothing. And if tomorrow there was another pandemic and we weren't able to do events for another year or two, it's the power of the brand. Bingo Loco came back after COVID and it was just as strong as ever before. We're still doing every Friday, every Saturday in 22. And that's because we invested in the brand, doing fun activations, creative video, solid social media, creating a reputation of a fun night out, so that when COVID was over and after 18 months we could finally do a show again, we sold out.
as you're talking, you're mentioning kind of businessy concepts, if you like the moat, for example, you just mentioned there. You've been talking quite a lot about competition and trying to make sure, you know, venues are profitable and getting feedback from the customers and all of this. This is the kind of thing that takes people a full career to learn. And I'm wondering how you've kind of gotten to a place where you're implementing all of this stuff in your business at such a young age and for such a young business. Have you taken advice from kind of external advice, or has it kind of all come from learnings?
It's a bit of both, you know, like when you're younger, you don't care about taxes, but when you're running a business and you realize it's important or else you are paying a lot more than you probably should, you start to become a bit of an expert in tax. I'm now an expert in gambling compliancy. Was that my intention? No, but when you get a fire, you put it out. As an entrepreneur, you spend 16 hours watching YouTube videos to figure out how to do something yourself. Because when you're building a business, you don't necessarily have the finance to go off and get the best legal expertise, to get the best things. You do a lot of it yourself. And so entrepreneurs tend to be Swiss Army knives who are pretty good at everything. You'll learn how to build a website. You learn about marketing strategies, how to build ads. You'll learn about, you know, how to automate spreadsheets. You're going to learn how to do contracts, you know, things that are boring that you would never have any interest naturally doing, but it forms part of the overall business and the vision. And so all of a sudden, anything to do with your business becomes a really exciting opportunity to learn. Mentorship is something that we probably were a bit late to the game in, but we would get like a business expert to come in and do a day of strategy. And, you know, once a year, we would have done that. And it's gotten to the stage where we bring now someone in and we're like, we could probably do this ourselves now. We just know that we can create the strategy session, ask each other for what we need, put a structure on it, you know, doing simple SWOTs and talking about different markets. And so we started just facilitating our own strategy, not because of it's more cost effective, but because once you do a lot of it, you realize it's a lot of the same stuff over and over again. We'd read business books, we'd be on our own journey, we'd learn from each other a lot. If I learned something, I'll like, you know, ring one of the guys and be like, I just figured out this new thing. And I spend 10 or 15 minutes talking with them about it. Oh, cool, I'm going to try that. So a lot of it is self-learning. A lot of it is shared learning. Some of it was paid learning. But yeah, I think if you ask any entrepreneur what they've learned on the journey, it's a lot of it's been self-aided, you know?
I think a lot of people that come in here, I think one thing I've learned is that this whole thing, starting a business, working with people, growing a business, scaling, it's difficult. It's actually really, really difficult. I think more difficult than someone who's not doing it might understand. Firstly, would you agree with that? And secondly, what's kind of been the most difficult part of it for you?
Scaling a business is hard the first time. But once you understand how to scale, how to sell, it becomes much easier, you know, how to do lead gen, how to do outreach, build a sales pipeline. You know, if you understand your market and how to reach it, if you've got a product and you know that like the market needs it, scaling it can be very easy. I think the hardest part for us sometimes, and it's been a bit of a journey, but the hardest part for us sometimes is making sure that, especially in the early stages, that the quality of a show, whether you go to it in New York or you go to the show in West Cork, that the quality of the show and the experience is equal to or greater. And we were probably a bit late in the game. Like when we went to the UK, we did a massive group deal. And we thought we were shit hot because we knew we had like 14 venues on board, ready to go at the same time, 10 dates in each, locked in, contracted. We were like, this is brilliant. We're there a week, 14 venues, come at us. But then we had to get a lot of teams to go do those shows. And our Irish teams were pretty busy and we didn't have the budget to be flying in and flying out and ground transport and accommodation and stuff. So, okay, right. We need to get some dress rehearsals going. And we'd let the CEO and his assistant go and interview people. But the product at that stage was institutionalized in me and my business partner's brain. So even though they were based in the UK and it was easy for them to set up the rehearsals and they'd seen some Bingo Loco shows, for us, the magic, the feeling of what Bingo Loco was in our heads, it's in our hearts. And so what they saw as a good host and a good DJ was completely different from what we thought. And so although like we were now on sale and sales were going well, all these new hosts and DJs rocked into these venues and they were subpar. And we didn't really think about it until about 3 shows later. Ticket sales are dropping. The customers are going, oh, the first show where it was maybe an Irish team or something seemed really good. But the second or third show that we went to, it wasn't as good. You know, the format wasn't great. You know, the venues were nightclubs, which not really true to what Bingo Loco does. We usually do live music venues or venues with touring artists, even if it is a nightclub, it's a touring artist venue. And we soon realized quickly that we needed to scrape it, start again, put training protocols in place. And it's not that simple. So going to the US, we were then armed with this sort of approach of we are only as good as our show and only as good as our last show. And so we leaned really heavy into like training, rehearsal, shadowing. Here's a script, you know, and you'll of course be privy to some of this now because you're going to be doing a show very soon. But that has meant that although you'll still get a fuck up, you'll still get someone coming to a show and seeing an MC who's having a bad day. Even some people who've done a few shows, they can have a bad day. Maybe there's inconsistency in them. But ultimately, I would say now the chances of you coming and seeing a poor show is low. Maybe someone drags it on too long a little bit, but they'll get it from A to B. Maybe if it's their first show, whatever it is. But there's constantly monitoring, there's checking, there's shadowing. The show teams give feedback on the venue. The customers give feedback on the show. The venue gives feedback on the show and the performers on the night. So if you're on a stage with the DJ, or if you're the DJ and you're on stage with a host, and one of you guys makes a mess up, you're not going to narc on each other. But the first person to complain about the show will be the person who paid for a ticket. So it allows us to have a full 360 review of what actually happened at a show. And a lot of our venues are brutally honest. They'll say, that host was terrible compared to the host before. They've seen a lot of shows and they know what a good show is. And the audience, you know, we have a lot of repeat customers and they'll be very quick to, especially in the US, they are so quick to let you know if something wasn't right. They're not looking for a refund. Like here, we moan when we want a refund. In the US, they'll just moan because they're like, that's just, they will. They'll let you know if they don't like something. They're very quick to jump on. A customer service is hugely important over there. You know, like if you go to a restaurant here and you go to a restaurant in New York, the service is different. Yes, they're getting a tip, but it's different. So there's value in that.
What other things have you found out about bringing the show to the US, whether it's how the show runs or little things like customer service is more important? What else have you discovered about that?
Expectations are higher. Here, Irish people are coming to the show because they want to party. And in Dublin, we get a lot of hen parties from the UK, and it's a big party. People are there to drink. Before the show starts, the audience is already eating out of the palm of your hand. You know, you do a call and response and they're already like, you know, kneeling on the bench, fist in the air. They're ready to go. They're hammered. They've got the sash around them. They're like ready, you know. In the US, they might be driving to the show. Big cities, not really even to public transport. Public transport's for the crazies, as they'll say. And that means that like they're not getting as hammered early. They pace out their drinking a bit more. They still drive, which is bizarre to us here in Ireland, but they do. And that's been a big thing because the expectation is higher. The product needs to be exceptional, you know? And they might say like prizes need to be better. You know, the lead in for the show needs to be shorter. We want more space between the tables. Like we're not getting that feedback in any other market, but they're like, this is what we want. But they're also spending like up to $40 to $45 for a ticket. Whereas here we're charging, you know, 29, 30 euros. So the expectation is higher. The quality of general production in the US is higher. Like when you're going into a venue, it's state-of-the-art production, massive screens, huge speaker arrays. You're going to giant music halls. In Ireland, we're in hotel function rooms because there isn't that infrastructure of live music venues around the country once you get outside of the top 3 or 4 major cities. And even then, like, you know, people always complain about the scarcity of performance spaces in Dublin. It's hotels and it's offices and whatever, whether that's true or not, you know? So it makes it easy for us to charge more going into these venues because the production is higher, but the cost of these venues is higher. So you're getting a better venue, but it's not as affordable, you know? It's a different commercial structure. And whereas here, there's one way to do a venue deal, maybe 2. Over there, there's 7 or 8. You know, it could be a co-pro, it could be a rev share, it could be a door split, it could be a straight rental, it could be a blended hybrid approach. You know, it could be a sliding scale deal. You know, and you have to wrap your head around all of these things because they'll send you a deal sheet and you're like, I need like someone to help me understand what this is. You know, it's all new. But I will say that now that we've onboarded, like, you know, we're in 110 locations, but we've also like done a lot of each city you go into and you set up in, you're probably doing 3 or 4 different venue deals to find which the best one is. So you multiply the locations we're in by 3, and you know that's enough to make anybody an expert in venue acquisition.
How are you selling it? Like what's the is it you going directly to these venues, or you know what's the actual detail of how you're selling the show?
You know, it's funny, it's changed. Like 1st of January last year, I flew to Dallas. I had a cowboy hat on, big country fan obviously, and I literally just door stopped venues. And I was like, hey, I'm Will. You know, we got this bingo rave called Bingo Loco. You didn't answer my email. Do you have a minute to chat? You know, like real sell the snake oil. And it was fun. A lot of them were like, okay, like no one really ever comes and just knocks on the door. Are you from Austin? Are you from here? I'm like, no, just thought I'd pop in and knock around. And so I was just doing taxi from venue to venue, just trying to hope to get a meeting with a venue. And I did that for about a month all around Texas. Went to every city, you know, was sitting in bars, asked the bartender, like, what's the best venues around here? And they give me 2 or 3, and I'm like, yeah, but where's the concerts? Where's popular? Because you want to get the local touch. And then door stopping, just calling and hoping that there's someone there in the box office. And that was exhausting. So then I went to California, rented a big RV, and basically traveled around this house on wheels, again from venue to venue, to San Francisco, down to San Diego, you know, doing site recce's, trying to figure out what the floor plan was. And again, a lot of them are like, no one comes here to try and get their gig in here. Usually it's an email, it's an agent, whatever it is. But because we sell ourselves, this was just the attempt. And at this stage now, we'd had like 7 or 8 venues. Things were up, they were on sale. Some were selling really well. Some were kind of struggling. We're trying to figure out how to market in the audience, especially places like New York. It's super expensive to market in New York. But now we had some momentum, and I was like, okay, now I have momentum. I can stop like going door to door, and people can say, oh, these are in really good venues, you know? And it allowed me to say, we are in these venues. This is how many venues, or this is how many dates we're doing. This is the sales that we're getting, you know? Can you give us a chance? I'll take an average deal to start off with, but here's the deal I want if it works well. And so even though I'm going in saying, you know, we've doing thousands of these in Ireland, and we're all over Australia, we're doing gigs in Dubai, all over the UK, you know, I want you to see it for yourself firsthand. Venues like that, especially if you're going in saying that this is the deal I want, but will you give us a trial gig? So it means your follow-up is good, we're good to go. And now you have the deal that you want. And that's good too. And you're not going to make a lot of money on it. But when you look at, say, if you wanted to set up a cafe in a city, you got to have a lease, a capex for refurbishment, you got to buy in all the stock. For us, like each launch was an experiment at the start. We tried big venues, small venues. We tried concert halls, music halls. We tried nightclubs. We tried every kind of space. We were experimenting with different ads, different agencies, different platforms, different ticketing companies. But after 6 months, we had experimented a lot and we were profitable. And that traction was getting around. Now venues were coming to us being like, hey, my friend who has his venue in Lexington in Kentucky mentioned that you guys are great to work with. And we want to do a show. And our approach is we don't want to do one show with you. We want to work with you for a few years. So we want to do maybe 8 shows a year for the next 5 years. We'll do 40 shows with you. And they're like, all right. So like, tear that deal sheet up. This is a different model. This is a residency model, and we're going to It's a long-term partnership. We'll keep pivoting things to make sure like we'll increase the capacity. We'll work with you on ticketing. You know, if we're doing festivals in the area, we'll work with you guys on licensing and bars. So they start seeing that this guy isn't presenting a gig. He's not coming in looking for a night and a performance and then giving an artist deal sheet. He's looking for a long-term partnership. And that changes the tone of the conversation because they realize, okay, I'm going to be talking to this guy for a couple of years.
How are you staffing it? Because you were talking there a few minutes ago about going into the UK and, you know, what a shock it was to just have 14 nights on. But the US is, you know, it's already kind of 10 times the size of the UK. How is that all working, and how are you figuring that out?
Yeah, sure. Only 2 weeks ago, we had like 40 shows on in a weekend, you know? And that involves like, you know, a fleet of vans coming from our warehouse in Dublin to service shows in Ireland. Same from Birmingham, Glasgow. You know, might be teams in different cities in Australia going to a warehouse and getting their bits and going off and doing a show. The US, of course, is different, you know? And how we've done it is a bit of a secret sauce in terms of like we've spent years working the best deals from, you know, the manufacturers of our prizes and our special effects from overseas suppliers. You know, it's a bit of a logistical nightmare, but it works. And with lots of lead in and planning, like our teams rock into the venue, the stuff's all there ready to go. They set it up. They have their own stuff that comes with them as well. And in about 2 hours, they're ready to go to a live audience. You know, we can start scanning tickets in. It's good. So it's 2 hours when they land in. And the teams fly in from anywhere. Some teams are local, some are not.
As you're talking, you seem like a very confident person. It seems to have worked out. And you've mentioned some of the moments where, you know, COVID, where it looked like potentially you could have been in trouble. What are some of those moments like for you personally, some of these kind of existential things that have happened in the business over time?
In those moments of crisis, you do come together, but the heavy digging isn't always done by 3 people because in certain crises, certain skills will shine more than others. So during COVID, as an example, we had a massive warehouse and a lease. We managed to get rid of the office in Dublin, but we were like, we still have this bloody lease. And also we have staff overheads. There were subsidies coming in. We didn't get any of the event grants because people were confused by like, you know, what is bingo? Can we even give it a grant? And so we just ended up just kind of doing everything ourselves. We've never got any money off like of Enterprise Ireland or anybody, even though we're doing shows in all of the developing economies around the world. Not bitter or whatever. Thanks to Enterprise Ireland. But the trouble there was we now had to do something to keep the lights on. We let some people go. Very sad to build a company with a lot of good friends, and letting go of your friends was really hard. But now we were in a position where we realized like, well, we were the first event company in Ireland to do a stream, this idea of streaming events. And we'd tease it in the office. There was initially bite back from one of the partners, like, that's a joke. No one's ever going to tune into it. And I was like, well, if we're at home for a long time, we're going to have no other option. But why don't we just experiment and try it? It's one of those moments where like, let's just experiment and try it. And we had 55,000 people tune in to play Bingo Loco online. This is like peak April. Everyone's like, what's going on? We thought this was 2 weeks. It's going to be for the long haul now. And we had like Dustin the Turkey come in and do a set. We had Danny from the Corona sing a song. And we had people at home, like, rather than doing a lip sync battle on stage, we had people like, okay, run to your kitchen and send us a video of you eating an onion and we'll feature the winner on the screen in 2 minutes. You know, and meanwhile, we'd be playing music and we'd be letting off confetti in the studio and we'd be calling out numbers. And then we'd start like throwing up on the screen, people eating an onion at home and like, you know, just really funny stuff, playing around with it. We'd figured out a way to like automatically generate bingo books from an algorithm, and that people could click a link and get a bingo book, and they could like print it off at home, mark it off, take a screenshot, send it into a WhatsApp ticker at the bottom of the screen. We basically made like a TV game show in the space of 24 hours. And you know, we didn't think it'd be as big as it was, but like Joe started sharing, Bingo Loco, we're doing an online stream because nothing else was happening. And again, it's all about being the first to do something. But that allowed us to go, right, well, there you go. The stream does work. Let's lean into that. So we contacted all of our corporate clientele and we're like, do you want a Bingo Loco for all your workers from home? And they were like, that's a great idea. And so the warehouse became a TV studio with a green screen and with a few cameras and arrays. We built all of our rigging and stuff. We'd set that up to hold cameras and stuff. And yeah, for almost a year, we became a virtual corporate streaming. We were doing race nights, ostrich racing in North Africa, and you'd be betting on these ostriches and whatever it is. And for not real money, but whatever the corporates wanted to put up as prizes. And we were doing like online trivia and all sorts of stuff. And this was like all these other event companies were still kind of trying to figure out how to build a studio. We were already in people's inboxes, and we were busy. We managed to somehow still make a profit during COVID from streams with no subsidies. And the real learning there was that, Craig, who markets stuff, he had nothing to market because we're just selling to corporates. And although like very much a part of planning and the strategy and what we need to do, the heavy work in that scenario is me selling to corporate clients. And I was living in Mexico at the time, just like, yeah, so, if you're interested in having one of our game shows, let us know. And the operations was done by one of our guys who was a creative guy, and he was like helping design the shows. And but there wasn't a huge amount to do for Stephen either. But we were all in the crisis together. The heavy digging was done by me, but in other crises and other moments, the heavy digging is done by Stephen, or the heavy digging is done by Craig. So it doesn't always need to be equal. Like any good relationship, sometimes someone's doing more of the digging than the other person, but usually as time goes on, it all kind of works out the same.
Would you ever sell this business? And the reason I ask is because clearly you love it and you're very engaged in it, and it seems that your co-founders are as well. And we've talked a little bit about ambition and money versus meaning and that kind of thing. So that's I'm just wondering, do you think you'd ever sell it?
It's an interesting question because we've had offers. We've had people looking to buy in or looking to buy outright. We've built structures within the company that means that if me and the partners did step away today, that it would still run very successfully without us there. And that's a very appetizing thing for a buyer. A company that has all of these dates and all these venues, everything's contracted, it's paper tight. And if the guys all, were in a road accident tomorrow, the company would still run and function perfectly. You have a general manager in place. He's been with us from very early days. He's worked his way up from being an event manager at a show to being the general manager of the global enterprise. And he's one of the most amazing hard workers ever. And any person who comes in to buy the company would go, okay, that's easy. Right now it's doing really well. We're enjoying the growth. It's not necessarily always gonna be a lifestyle business. Everyone has a price, but for now it's not our primary concern. It's not our primary goal. We're not out shopping it. But yeah, I think if the right price came, of course, any entrepreneur would love to sell his business at a nice multiple, but it's not a priority. I think any business owner who's out constantly trying to shop it maybe doesn't believe in it enough to actually make enough money long term. But Bingo's doing what we wanted to do, and so we're under no pressure to try and sell it. It's not, the revenues we're beating forecasts every month, and that's just merely because we might have a certain amount of events to forecast, or we've got to bring in 3 new venues this month, but month on month we're bringing in like 10, 15 new locations, and there's no way any accountant can can account for that level of accelerated growth, because each week the goalposts are changing. It's a good problem to have in a way. But yeah, so we're not shopping.
And why not buy in? I suppose, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but is it because you have a good dynamic between the three of you and you don't feel like you found the right partner as such?
Well, a lot of like VCs, they'll give you a contribution, they'll bleed the money in over time. You lose a bit of control, and typically, it's because you need the money to set up a market. And we had this is a pretty important piece actually. Before going to the US, we had realized that we got to put a lot of money in to go to the US. It's a big market, and even towards setting up the entity and like getting visas and stuff like that, you need to have like sink at least 100 grand in. That's before you actually start investing in anything else. You need like staffing, robust infrastructure or whatever it may be. And most companies or most founders would go, right, well, I'm going to cash flow. I'm going to use someone else's money for that. And we had reserves. They weren't by any means massive. Like we'd paid ourselves frugally. It's always been about keeping the company, invest in growth. And we were like, maybe this is the one time we need to take on some finance, whether it's a loan or it's a partner, get a cash injection and hit the US hard, with the idea of being in 60 locations in a year. Like we need to really invest in like team. And we said, you know what, let's just do it ourselves. Let's put all of our money into it. If it works, we'll be laughing ourselves. And if it doesn't, we're kind of fucked. And so we just went for it. Like, it was a bit of a gamble. And I think if you look at anybody who's, their company's turning over a couple of million, they're usually a bit of a risk taker or a gambler in general. If we'd gone with the safe route of like financing it with a big loan, to maintain 100%, or going down the VC route, we might be in a very different position. But after a year, rather than being in 60 locations, we were in 100. And, any money we put in came back very fast. And probably the best decision we've ever made in the company's history.
You're growing very quickly, and but I'm wondering what's the ambition, or what do you see as the future for Bingo Loco?
In Ireland, just for context, once you get outside of Dublin, you've got a city of 200,000 in Cork, 90,000 in Galway, 70,000 in Limerick, roughly. I could be wrong on those figures. And that's they're good cities. When we're doing Galway, like, every month, we were doing Cork nearly every fortnight. And what you soon realize is that the top 100 cities in the US exceed every city in Ireland outside of Dublin and Cork. When you keep in mind that in Dublin we're doing every Friday, Saturday, every weekend, it gives you a sense of the size of the scale. And we realize every week we're only scratching the surface here. So if you look at New York, that's 8 times the population and just New York City. There's obviously greater New York, and New York State, but the market is enormous, and it just seems to be getting bigger and bigger the more we look into it, the more we feel into it. It took us maybe about a year and a half before we started doing like bigger shows in Ireland. We would do like an RDS show. Within maybe 8 months, we were doing very large shows, and we're going to start doing arena shows soon, which will be 6,000 tickets. These are not small spaces. So it seems that wherever the ambition grows, the market follows, and we're very confident in where that goes. But realizing also that Bingo Loco is now one arm, and there's all these other products that we're rolling out, and that we've learned how to grow Bingo Loco in the US and rolling out these other concepts. They're selling out. You're selling 1,200 tickets in a venue for a country night, and it's working really well, and we're innovating the product and making it better. So whatever we're doing with Bingo, we can multiply it 2 or 3 times with other innovations, albeit differently. Like Bingo is, like I said at the start, competitive socializing. You can really do a high frequency in a market, but your capacity is lower because you got lots of tables and chairs in there. But these other concepts, we realize that like once you have trust with the venue and you know how to market and you know how to build something, there's no end of the road in sight.
Well, Meara, it's been a pleasure talking to you this morning. Before we finish up, you asked your dad whether he had any regrets, and I'm wondering the same thing for you so far. You're a young man, but do you have any regrets?
Just lessons, I think. Some business I had failed, and some things were hard work. Some businesses seemed great on the outside, but they were really for the ego, Like me and the lads also had a party hostel in Cambodia. I'm not sure why we went down that route, but we did. We had bars on Francis Street, and a few other harebrained adventures. But the reality is each one of those ventures was an elimination process, an understanding of what you're good at, what you're not good at, what you like, what you don't like. And I think If I didn't have those moments at the time, felt very regretful. Like, why the hell did we do this? You lose money, or you have to sacrifice some very important moments in your life to try and make something work. They're great lessons, and maybe expensive, but not more expensive than a degree here and there. So I would say that the hard knocks learning of those apparent regrets are actually just learnings of failures now. And I'd like to think that we're making less failures. I'm doing a lot less commercial side projects now. So I'm no longer involved in hostels in Cambodia, bars in Dublin city centre, Web3 DeFi things, and focusing mostly on Bingo. I also have a travel company, but even that has become something that, as Bingo has grown, it's taking more of my attention, and I find myself only working on projects that fill the soul. So it either provides a good revenue or it provides a spiritual fulfillment, and prioritizing friends, family, and myself.
Will, thank you very much for coming in. It's
Thank
been
you, man.
a pleasure, and wish you the best of luck with Bingo Loco and everything else that you're doing.
And you too on stage tomorrow.